Hello everyone, welcome to Chasing a Murderer. Before we get started, take a moment to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you would like notifications whenever we have new uploads. I want to reach out to you guys and thank you for all your help and your support. I really couldn't have done this without you. And a special thanks to those who have donated to the Chasing a Murder Patreon to help us keep going. You guys have bought a lot of mics and a lot of books. So we left off, we're at the end of January of 2019. Lori Vallow, according to Charles, has gone off the deep end. And right now, his main goal is to try to get evaluation and help for his wife because he believes that her mental status just isn't okay. But this has proved to be a challenging and hard job. He found Lori's Infiniti car at JJ's school, where he took Lori's purse. And that's where Lori Vallow later on ends up going to the police station. Why? And we'll talk about it in just a second, because you got to think, Charles is aware that he's a dark spirit, but he is learning that he may not be the only dark spirit around. In fact, he's learning that anyone who isn't on Lori's side will be deemed a dark spirit. But before we go further into Lori, Chad, and Charles, there is a woman that did an interview with Nate Eaton. Her account, I feel, is very important to understand the train of thought of these people and how these people are drawn in to believe these things, because a lot of you are like, how are these people falling for this? A lot of you believe that the LDS main church is somehow affiliated to this Preparing a People group. And this lady actually explains everything perfectly. Nate Eaton at East Idaho News has gotten several impressive interviews with ex-members of these groups, these circles, which are operating outside the LDS leadership. And I want to say that Nate Eaton has done a fantastic job covering this case. So he sits down with a lady who uses the alias Jessica. She doesn't want her real name used, and you can't blame her. And she will give you a glimpse into how the people believe, these crazy ideas when they join cults or cult-like groups like this. And they don't even realize that they're really joined a cult. So all of this is revolving around the second coming or end days. Jessica said that she met this guy one day in church. We're going to skip through a lot of it because we're going to have to. And she says this guy reaches out to her and says that he was prompted by God to reach out to her and invited her to come work for him. Jessica doesn't give this guy's name, but I often wonder, is she referring to Michael James? We know a lot of people like this. We know David Warwick, but David Warwick isn't in the Rexburg area yet. But Michael and Nancy James are. I've guessed, but I don't know. I haven't had time to go and research what I wanted to in this yet. But just know that she said she starts working for this guy around 2015. So this is about the same time Julie Rowe is becoming popular. She says she does notice that this guy seems to have these spiritual gifts. He often helps people who have dark spirits and helps cast out these evil spirits. This person is absolutely in love with Julie Rowe and her book and books like that. This clique of people, they begin going to a lot of these little conferences that start around in between 2015 and 2018. Many of them being connected to the Preparing a People. She even notices that Chad Daybell has come to visit her boss a few times. Now let's talk about this part first. So it's going to be in the Nate Eaton interview at East Idaho News, where she talks about her experience once she starts working for this guy who is believing that he can cast out spirits, that he is a spiritual leader. He's preparing for the second coming. They're talking about 10 cities. And he can also put like a shield around the building he's working in. She gives us an idea of how she started to believe that this guy had healing capabilities or had people that he knew that could heal her, because Jessica is struggling with a few health issues. And she starts off by saying how she feels ashamed for believing all these things.
I feel shame for believing the things that I believed. If there's another person in my shoes who's dealing with this and it's under the guise of, spiritual guidance or trying to help keep you on the path to God or keeping you, in a place where you can receive the blessings that God has for you, I want that person to be able to see that they might need to look at it from a different angle. I've had constant stomach troubles throughout my life, and I had celiac for 7 years at that point, and my intestines were just really struggling. And one day, my employer and I were talking, and I was probably crying because I was hurting so bad. And he said, "Don't you have the faith to be healed?" But that day in his office, I was hurting so much and I was so desperate to not be in pain that there was a shift in my mind, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna see if I can get to a place where I feel like I could be healed. And I talked about it with my former husband. I talked about it with my boss. And a week or two later, on Mother's Day, 2016,
Jessica believes they heal her celiac and other issues. She truly believes that she's being healed.
My husband, I talked about it with my boss. And a week or two later, on Mother's Day, 2016, they gave me a blessing and healed my celiac and healed my blood sugar issues. And they healed hormonal imbalances and thyroid issues to where I stopped taking all my thyroid medicine and my supplements. And I slowly got to where I wasn't so scared. And I eventually tried eating.
Needless to say, her illness comes back a few years later, and she's told that maybe it's her lack of faith. But she has common sense, and she figures out that's not what it is. This deceit will actually cost her her faith, because she will actually condemn her LDS religion completely because of this handful of people. But she's starting to believe perhaps maybe she just Mormoned wrong. At the time of this interview, she wasn't certain if she would go back to her religion or not. I kind of hope that she finds her way back, because I know a lot of you people are angry with the LDS, but not all of them believe as Lori and Chad. Jessica seems like a very nice lady. Anyway, she says, she gives us a glimpse into what they were doing to prepare and talks a little bit about gathering in tent cities. And she says Chad Daybell is quite respected.
Oh, he was idolized. The thing that really surprised me at that gathering was seeing how I'd never seen so many people that believed in this idea of tent cities, because that's the easiest way to call it is.
What is that idea?
Okay.
Explain the tent city idea.
Okay, because if you say tent cities and somebody knows what you mean, it's like you instantly connect and, oh my gosh, cool, you're into this.
I don't know what you mean.
I know you don't.
So if you could explain what tent cities are.
Sure. So one of the common ideas with members of the church who are focused on kind of the end times and preparing for the coming of Christ and the tribulations is this idea that some random Sunday, the bishop's going to come into Priesthood Relief Society and ask anybody who has their food storage to come join in another meeting. And he's going to say, it's time, we've been called out to go wherever, and you need to bring your food storage to the church. They'll load it up on trucks, and then you leave. People have their large canvas tents. We cashed out retirement at one point to buy that and more.
Wait, hold on. You and your husband.
Yes.
So, no, you don't have to laugh.
No, I'm laughing because of the absurdity of it now. Yeah. But we had two 16 by 20, 20 by 24 canvas tents. And they were and we had the massive cots from Cabela's and below 30 sleeping bags and a stove and a year's supply of charcoal to cook 3 meals a day. In these kind of prepper tent city communities, we believed that there would be a time that we would be called out. And if we weren't, then there would be a time that these items would be needed. And so we had a year's supply of certified gluten-free food storage because I had celiac. We had stuff to keep us warm. We had cloth diapers and little sets of scriptures because you never know whose kids you're going to be helping take care of.
Any idea how much money you spent on all that?
At least $15,000 to $20,000.
Wow. The behavior with your boss continued to, looking back now, to not be normal.
Yes. So there would be times where we'd be encountering constant software issues, whether it's a web-based product or a computer-based product. And eventually he said, hey, if you're noticing this happening, let me know, because it's usually we're getting some kind of interference. He always had what he called a shield of protection around his house, and eventually extended that to be around the houses of all of his employees.
Invisible protection, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're not talking about a fence here.
Nope. We're talking about a spiritual shield of protection.
And how did he get that?
He knelt and prayed and invoked his priesthood authority.
So he said that the business was protected.
Yes.
And if you had any computer problems, let him know.
Yes, so that he could reinforce those protections or cast something out that got through. So if the computers are acting up, you holler upstairs to where his office is and you say, hey, can you take care of things?
So he's casting spirits out of computers, putting shields around the home and around the business. And you think that this is normal? I mean, you didn't think anything abnormal about it.
So Chad would occasionally come by.
Chad would occasionally come by.
So yes, Chad had come by at least twice. I met him at work. But there were other members of this community. It was a constant subject of conversation. We were always talking either about, what people were doing or what was happening in the work.
How long were you there? 4 years?
I was there for 3 years.
3 years. What caused you to finally leave?
So I was invited to let an employee go as what appeared to be a growing experience in 2017. And it went badly and was enormously triggering emotionally. And I had struggled with PTSD from abuse and neglect in my childhood and other traumatic events, and it really caused a recurrence of the anxiety and a lot of those struggles. And so my employer was kind enough to set me up with this counselor / energy worker that he'd been working with, and we did, and she did it for free for me since I worked for him. And we did twice weekly counseling sessions over the phone for about 6 months, from the fall of 2017 to early 2018. And during these, it was a form of modified hypnosis. And every now and then, she would be encountering interference. So she would ask my boss to sit in on the sessions and help cast out spirits. And sometimes it wasn't needed, but he sat in on many of those sessions.
So she says it's interesting when they get new people or new employees, people that depend on them for pay. They also mentioned that God told them to reach out to them. They inform them of some of their strange teachings, and they always make a big deal. We're going to let them know today. She doesn't elaborate why something bothers her when she has to let an employee go, but it's traumatizing for her. And you can tell she's a very good-hearted woman. And this has a lot to do with probably why she's drawing to some of these people, because they they'll open themselves up as helpful, good people. There are so many people like Jessica in this world who don't know where they fit in because they can't seem to find those honest people. And each time they let their guard down, well, they have to build it up 10 times thicker. And I can understand. And here's a hint.
That we rationalize and we tell ourselves that, so-and-so is a good person. But the reality is, if this is happening, so-and-so is not a good person, or their behavior is not good. And so I spent 2 weeks with that as an active prayer and had a breakthrough about the trauma that I'd experienced in my life. And I knew that this was the priority, dealing with my family and my emotional well-being. And so at first I just realized I need to step away from the church. Every decision I'd made there over the course of my life had been out of fear of not being loved, fear of not being cared for. And I guess this is a good time to say, I know that there are people that the church is an absolutely wonderful part of their life, that it is a great piece of their fantastic personality and the service that they do. My children are still members of the church. My parents are still members of the church. So I share this very aware of the possibility that it can hurt others' feelings, but it was for me and my life.
So you not only have to, in a way, leave this group, but leave the church.
Yes.
But at the time, you're thinking it's all the same.
I'm thinking it's all the same. Tangle the confusion that had come up with my faith crisis is what we often call it. And but I quickly realized within a matter of weeks that I could not sit in my skin knowing that I was not living up to my covenants. The promises that we make in the temple, at baptism, the idea of being a bad Mormon was absolutely unacceptable. And so I ultimately decided and consulted with my husband at the time and with his dad and realized, like, this is the best thing. And so I resigned from the church in March of 2018. My family, my children, all remained members. I ended up having the opportunity to go down and work with somebody in Utah. And I spent 28 days as an outpatient there, and he specialized in trauma and PTSD.
So you're going through this therapy, you're realizing you've got to find out who you really are. And meanwhile, what's happening at work?
He was not in the office very much. He would be out in Wyoming filming things for something. And so I was running the business and taking on too much responsibility. And more importantly, I was taking on too much of the mental load. And I would go through cycles of frustration. And so I left my job, but I had helped, we were partners in the building entity. So we still...
I can't help but wonder if she's referring to Michael and Nancy James. Many people are trying to find out who is in the center of all this. And you got to remember, who is surrounding, preparing the people? Chad Daybell. So where is he learning this stuff? A lot of people believe it's Julie Rowe. And guess what? People are letting Julie Rowe take the blame. You know, Julie Rowe does play a part in a lot of these things, but she isn't the leader. And if she isn't, then who is? What I found so far is preparing the people has a huge part to play. Creating fear and end-day conspiracies. And their statement later will reflect the fact that we have nothing to do with this. These people are just, they come out of nowhere. We don't really know them. But if Jessica's boss is Michael James, well, that changes this ball game altogether.
And it was very uncomfortable. I didn't trust. From the moment that I left in April and when I quit in May, I became scared of my former boss. And not necessarily because of anything he did, but I didn't trust myself around him because I knew I didn't have boundaries. I knew that I had deferred to his knowledge and expertise or spiritual standing for so long that I couldn't trust myself.
Spiritually, you were scared of him, or physically too?
Spiritually and mentally.
You didn't think he'd hurt you?
No, no, I was never worried.
Whoever this boss is that she's talking about, Nate Eaton, he has a feeling there's a lot more going on than what she's sharing. And so do I. This woman's scared to death.
About that.
But that he might mess with your
yes,
emotions.
That he was going to mess with my emotions.
Yeah.
I had learned the phrase gaslighting at that time and was realizing that that's what I'd been experiencing. After I left my job, it was as though my former husband, who knew all the details about the dysfunction in my work environment and in my work relationships, it was as though he had forgotten all of that and began twisting things around and using the stories that my former employer was saying. I just knew that staying in that marriage was not acceptable or reasonable.
You can catch this interview in its entirety at East Idaho, their YouTube channel. Now, there's one more piece I want to share from this interview, but make sure, guys, you go check out Nate Eaton's full interview, okay? See, Jessica hasn't come to light quite yet. She's still coming out of this brainwash. And though she's not part of the LDS any longer, she has friends that are, family members that are. And like the good person that she is, she doesn't hold that against them. But she says one of her friends opens her eyes just a little bit more. She suggests to Jessica that she might have been in a cult.
A really good friend who came over one night about 8 months ago, and we were just chatting. And for whatever reason, I started telling her how into the prepper stuff we were. And I started telling her about what I had experienced in my work environment. And she sat there dumbfounded and told me that I had been in a cult and that none of this stuff was okay. And I didn't believe her.
And this is a Latter-day Saint?
This is an active Latter-day Saint.
And she told you you've been in a cult?
She told me I was in a cult. And she told me that this was abuse and that it wasn't okay. And I remember sitting there and like, okay, I hear the words you're saying. I'm not going to internalize them because I don't know what to do with them. And that just seems crazy. I was just super faithful. So when I saw that day, I freaked because it meant that she was right.
Why did?
So Jessica goes into why she, sought out to share her experience with Nate Eaton and, her affiliation with some of these people attached to the Preparing a People group. So this just gives you an idea of how these people are mingling within, several groups of people, yet some of them don't even know the other exists, and how they're being very sneaky on how they adopt people into this belief system. So they kind of study them, watch them, and say, okay, well, they're ready to hear our crazy nonsense. So it's grooming. It's like being a predator for the cause of building Zion, preparing for the second coming. And anyone who's involved with this group, probably they have no idea that they've even been groomed, because what they feel feels real. And you always have those few people like Chad, Lori, Melenie Gibb, who know exactly what's going on, and they're picking up this technique and they begin grooming themselves. Except Lori, well, she's going to take it to another level that no one else could. And Chad is going to find that he was once the groomer, but now he's getting groomed. That's the way I feel, and I know some of you don't agree with that, and that's fine. Share your thoughts below. We're here to share. But for me, based off of my research, it just seems to me that Lori, she got into this group, and she started grooming them to be what she needed. And I'll tell you what that is soon. So how do you feel about them being referred to as a cult? Are they a cult or are they not? Don't forget about these beautiful faces here. Their stories, they still exist, but they have no answers like many families. I truly, truly think of these girls every single day, and I hope you do as well. Jasmine Robinson, Dulce, they are only a few of those faces that are out there. Thank you guys so much for being so supportive. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.